Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, friends and neighbors, and all peoples, welcome to episode 5 of The Garden of Ruin. In this piece, we'll explore stimulus addiction and the avoidant behaviors that can ruin relationships, platonic, romantic, or otherwise. Have you ever known somebody like that? A person that just can't put their phone down. They call in sick to work several times just to play video games or just to enjoy Netflix. They always go to the bar. They can't ever seem to meet their obligations or the expectations of themselves or people around them because they can't keep their hand off the stimulus button, or they can't keep away from things that bring them pleasure. And though these things may not really be productive, it's almost as if it has a grip over them. And now this could get really complicated, right? We could go into a whole narrative, a 500-part series about the complexities and the struggles of addiction, right? But in this series, we're going to explore something very broad and very surface, which is just how dopamine receptors work in the brain and how we can kind of really become stimulus or dopamine addicted. So it doesn't necessarily have to be drugs or alcohol or cigarettes or a cell phone addiction or video game addiction or media consumption addictions and things like that. It's just to understand parts of how people's brains work and parts of how these bad behaviors can be based on trauma. So, with what we've just said, having known one of those people or having been one of those people, or perhaps we ourselves at points in our lives acting like that, which is normal, right? We all want to zone out and we all want to reward ourselves with something that just really isn't getting anything done, but it makes us feel good, or it helps us decompress our brain after a long day to watch, programs or to listen to music or to just lay around. Now, the brain, as we have been saying earlier in this series, it is a highly effective or highly functioning machine. It will form these neural pathway formations. It will take the path of least resistance, and it will move as quickly as it can to get the desired response and the desired outcome. And so naturally, our brains are inclined to want to favor things that are going to make us feel good. So when we are introduced to things like drugs or like Netflix or video games or cell phones and things like that, we see convenience, we see leisure, we see joy, and we see something that we can use or have that will quickly start to make us feel good. And when we're presented with options to say, should I go to work today, or should I call in sick and have a sick day and binge watch a series of a show that I want, or a season of a show that I've been wanting to watch, and should I do that instead of go to work? Well, our brain is probably at the mechanical or at the organic level going to encourage us to do what makes us feel good. But because we have learned behaviors and we have a series of morals or values that are ingrained in us usually from our childhoods up into our adulthood, we say, no, that's not appropriate for me to be doing that. I'm going to go to work, or I'm going to do something for my family, or I'm going to be doing something that's more productive. Like, it would be nice, but I have more important obligations. So something like this is not necessarily an issue that can form in childhood. Of course, there are things like that where, someone may have come from a very unstructured living environment growing up, and, it was very much a situation where the parents wouldn't really care if the kid skipped school or did something like that, and the kiddo stayed at home all day and played video games, or the parents were, very absent and not involving the kid in after school activities, so the kid would just, zone out on video games all the time, or watching television, or just something like that. It could have been a TV household. And there are things like that. But these are our behaviors that can easily form in adulthood as well is that as we progress, when we get frustrated during stages of our career, when we get to certain places in our life, we can move to a place where we just decide it's easier, instead of staying up all weekend working on that project, it's easier to go to the bar all the time. And then that becomes something that our brain continues to reinforce and tell us, no, that feels good. Let's keep doing that. And it becomes harder and harder to resist it. And really, in the age we live in now, and at the time I'm recording this in March of 2020, cell phones are something that are very, very hard for most of us to get away from. And there's resources and things out there that are advising us to turn our phone off for 2 hours a day, to move it up to 4 hours a day, to 6 to 12 hours a day. But for most of us, that's very unrealistic. And it's not even if we do business on our phones or something like that. It's just because we've become so conditioned to enjoy how it feels to look through social media apps and to read blogs and to do all the things that give us pleasure, that we'll choose that over many other things. And whether that's for better or for worse, I don't know. But when we are faced with decisions, we have to beware of how our brain may try to encourage us to just choose what's pleasurable instead of what might be a better idea for us long term. And the more we give in and the more we reinforce those neural pathways, the stronger they become and the harder it becomes to move away from temptations like that. So this kind of problem is very equal opportunity, isn't it? It doesn't have to mean you had a hard childhood or something to end up being someone who's constantly hitting the stimulus button. Doesn't mean you have to have had a hard life to be that person, but there are so many things out there that can bring pleasure that our brains can be tricky towards us like that sometimes. So when you see that person who's sucking down cigarettes all the time, or you see that person who's drinking and maybe has damaged some relationships that they have in their life, or you see that person who can't get their face away from their phone, understand that, and of course that's their problem, isn't it? It's something that they need to handle. It's something that they need to take steps to make it get better. So none of it's okay that someone acts that way and it's on them to improve it. But understand that there may be more to that picture than we see, and that person may be having quite a battle inside their mind regarding what they're experiencing with that. So if we look at our drawing today, we see a character on the left that looks very overwhelmed, is just kind of staring in awe of what's ahead of them, and is really trying to comprehend how to tackle things in life. The character on the right, having chosen leisure over work and having pushed the stimulus button over and over again, has become very withered and frail, is laughing and really unable to see much of what's around them. Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.